Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Parkinson's Point. Today we have Dr. Emma with us, and she's going to share her expertise on managing Parkinson's disease and how nutrition can be a key tool in doing that. And she's going to share her knowledge and expertise around which diet is most appropriate or helpful and how we actually can take that knowledge of I know what I should eat and help translate it into the doing part. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Emma. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I love a lot of topics related to Parkinson's, so I'm excited to talk about food with you all today. So basic disclaimer is that I'm not affiliated or associated with any of these foods or food products or brands or anything like that. I just try to give you all some examples. And if you have any questions as we go through things, please let me know. And we can also have some time at the end, of course, for questions. So today I want you all to understand a little bit of the evidence around diet that slows the progression of Parkinson's and improves symptoms. What are those key elements? How is it effective for Parkinson's? And then really taking enough time so that we focus on some of those practical applications. I think Dr. Meredith is absolutely right. Even if we know it, it's not that helpful if we're not applying it and we're not able to implement it into our daily lives. So that's an important element we'll get to. So let's start out. The diet that has the most evidence right now on supporting a reduction in Parkinson's symptoms, slowing progression over time, so long-term benefit, is a whole food plant-based diet. I like to call it a whole food plant-rich diet, but it's very commonly associated as a whole food plant-based diet, or WFPD, you'll see. So basically what it is actually somewhat simple. It's eating a lot of plants. So I have a whole list of what plants are included. And we commonly think of that as vegetables and fruits, but it also includes nuts and seeds, grains, grasses, legumes or beans, and mushrooms, herbs, and spices. And we want to eat a majority of what we're eating are plant foods. And then we really want to eat it in a whole form. And so when we say whole form, it's really, can you recognize it as food? Does it have like a whole long list of label or ingredient lists? If it has a list of about 30 things, that's not really whole, that's pretty processed. It's pretty far down in the process line. And really, we know, we just have a better understanding of what we're putting in our body when we're eating something that's whole, and the nutrients are much more intact. And there are a lot of other benefits we'll go through, but that's basically the definition. So we're trying to eat mostly plants in whole, minimally processed forms. So I have a few examples of that just so we can kind of get our minds around it. So as an example, oats, I think oatmeal is a really common thing that we see people eating a lot, like maybe breakfast. And so oats are actually a grass. They start out on, you'll see on one side we have what the oat looks like originally, and it has a lot of different components. So we have the germ, the bran, the hull. There's these different aspects that contain the nutrients, fiber, and that's how oats originally are. So if we get something like a steel cut oat, it contains a little bit more of those initial packaged material of how the plant was originally formed. So you're getting more protein, more nutrients, more fiber. And down the processing line, for example, to get these quick oats, or what we commonly see as oatmeal, the flattened oat, that's been treated with heat and steam and removed some of the parts of the oat because it's more shelf stable. It won't go rancid if we remove some of that fat or we remove the outer part of the oat. And then we can take it even a step further, and then from there we can make oat milk, we can make ice cream that's out of oat. And so it's important to think about, when we're eating plants, it's not quite enough just to say, oh, I'm going to eat mostly plant foods, so I'll have oat milk ice cream versus cow milk ice cream. It's still, the oat milk ice cream is still pretty far down the list of processed foods, and it has a lot of things added to it. When we talk about processed foods, we also get a lot of hidden ingredients. So you think you might be eating, let's say, a vegan burger, like a black bean burger or something like that. And you're like, oh, great, I'm eating something plant-based. And it ends up having a lot of things in it that are really highly processed. So just one example is in the United States, there's estimates that about 75% of all processed foods that you might consume has corn as an ingredient, even if you don't think that you're eating corn, and it comes in a variety of forms. So that's just one example of when we eat a lot of processed foods, we are actually consuming a variety of different things without really understanding necessarily what we're putting in our bodies. So if we're focusing on mostly plants from whole food sources or unprocessed food sources, by this definition, we're naturally limiting or excluding animal products. So that can include meat, fish, seafood, eggs, dairy, processed foods. Maybe some of our favorites are on this list, like chips and bread and crackers and sweeteners, a lot of oils. And then we're also trying to limit or exclude what I put as the label of like non-food items that have to be in there for processed foods to be shelf stable or freezer stable, or just to improve texture, things like that. So conditioners, dyes, additives, preservatives, all of those things. So those are the things we're trying to, again, limit or exclude in this way of eating. I do want to pause real quick and make sure we know that WFPB, or the whole food plant-based diet, is not the same thing as a vegan diet. I get that question a lot. So being vegan, by most definitions, means you're excluding all of your animal products, but it doesn't actually talk about the quality of what you're eating, the quality of the plant foods that you're eating. And so this is just an example of like a vegan cheeseburger, frozen usually, that you might get, and you're like, oh great, I'm not eating meat. And yet when we look at the ingredient list, it has like 34 plus ingredients, and we're including a lot of extra things that we talked about that are really processed. So they're added to achieve texture and color and preservation. And you're ending up eating a lot of things that you may not have thought about, that is actually in here. And surprise, corn is in, in the ingredient list. So not to demonize corn. Corn is great. We can incorporate it in a whole food way. But again, just being aware that just because something's labeled as vegan, or just because something's labeled as like gluten-free, doesn't mean that it's following the definition of what we're trying to go for here. So I want to look at what are the benefits then of eating this type of diet. Plant foods, minimally processed form for Parkinson's is definitely our main focus. And I also want to highlight a few examples of how it can also be really beneficial. And we have a lot of evidence to support this type of eating is really good for your overall health. Most of the time, most of the people I work with who have Parkinson's, and all of us in general, we don't just get one condition. We also might have elevated blood pressure or cholesterol or prediabetes or diabetes, as a few examples. So let's actually, sorry?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, not a question, got it. So for a brief look at cardiovascular disease, so that could be elevated blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, variety of things that can happen in the cardiovascular system. We see that eating vegetarian or plant-based has been shown to decrease blood pressure and cholesterol. We see in a 2016 study that vegetarians had a 34% lower risk of developing high blood pressure compared to non-vegetarians. In a 2017 study, I like this study from 2017 because it was showing that impact on cardiovascular health is dependent on eating a healthy plant-based diet. So not just eating plants, but really the unprocessed as whole form sugars and refined carbs, a lot of sugar, and that's vegan, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. We're talking about really healthful plants. And then the sprint trials demonstrating definitely we could save a lot of lives if more people were eating a plant-based or healthier diet. The same thing goes in studies on type 2 diabetes and maintaining a healthy weight. So these studies are showing that when we eat plant-based diets or more plants, we're eating a lot more fiber and antioxidants. It helps you stay fuller longer. It helps regulate blood sugar, and it decreases your lipids or your elevated cholesterol or triglycerides. And we see that the more that you reduce animal intake, you make improvements in these areas. So in this study, it was looking at non-vegetarians, people who are eating fish, people who are eating eggs and dairy, and then vegans. And we can kind of see the step down of how your risk for diabetes decreased as we go down that. And this is from the American Diabetes Association. And in this study, they didn't look at the quality of plants, which I think is a limitation, like we saw in the other study, the quality matters, but it's still showing that there's improvement. This is from the American Institute for Cancer Research, and they found in a variety of studies that diets filled with vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, and other plant foods help lower your risk for many different types of cancers. And a lot of the research showing that these plant foods have a lot of minerals, vitamins, and phytochemicals that help you to stay healthy and help to lower that risk. And then finally, so there are a lot of clinical studies on a variety of different conditions and overall health. And we also see that when we're looking at really long-term studies, so we're looking at people who live around the world who are centenarians, or people who are able to reach 100 years of age or more and are able to live healthfully that long, are all eating a plant-based diet in the 4 out of the 5 regions that are studied in the blue zones. So that would be in Costa Rica, Italy, Greece, and Japan. They all do incorporate very small amounts of animal products. It kind of depends on the region, what they're including. So it's not that you can't eat them at all. It's just in very coming out of some of these regions on how to live healthfully for a long period of time as well. Let's focus on the brain. So what does eating more plant foods in a whole form our brain? So I love this study from 2017 because it shows how much of an impact such a small amount of plant food can make. So this study was about a half cup more of vegetables and fruits per day. And that led over time to a 13% decrease in your risk for dementia and cognitive impairment. That's really powerful. That's a half cup a day more, and you have such a significant decrease over time in your risk for dementia and cognitive impairment. And cognitive impairment is part of Parkinson's disease for many people. It's part of the disease process, and so we can definitely apply this there. And when they looked at a richer plants, the plants are really supplying antioxidants, omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, and a low amount of saturated fats from animal products really just decreases your risk of cognitive impairments, and has been shown to affect the onset of Alzheimer's disease specifically. So in Parkinson's disease, we see that these plant-based diets have been shown to positively influence symptoms and even progression. The plant-based diet reduces chronic inflammation, which is a really important part of Parkinson's. I don't think a lot of people maybe talk about that, but in chronic Parkinson's disease, we definitely see chronic inflammation, and that worsens Parkinson's symptoms and progression. So by eating more plant foods, we're reducing that. We're also modifying our microbiome. So the microbiome is basically all of the critters that live in our gastrointestinal tract. So we have healthy bacteria, fungi, and even healthful viruses that live in our gut, and we need them. We wouldn't be alive without them. They help us to modulate inflammation. They help us synthesize certain vitamins, and they have a major role in Parkinson's disease, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And the reason why it has a major role in Parkinson's disease is that our recent evidence and research shows that neuroinflammation, which is inflammation in our brain, actually originates from our gut. And that's how it travels into our brain and starts to impact that whole system. And again, we'll go into some detail here about that. So basically, when we eat things that are aggravating to our gut, so this might be alcohol, a lot of processed foods, get a lot of pesticides and other toxins, it breaks down the balance of the microbiome and the integrity of the cells that line our gut. So what that looks like is, instead of all the cells lining up like this, they're next to each other, they allow nutrients to pass through, but it's very regulated. Over time, when you're exposed to a lot of those things we just mentioned, it aggravates, it causes inflammation, and you start to get kind of gaps in between the cells that line your gut. And then a lot of these toxins and other chemicals can pass through, and there's no longer this regulation, and it goes right into our bloodstream, and then it travels to the brain. Our immune system, we have a very extensive immune system that actually resides in our gut. And again, that regulates a lot of the inflammation that will go into our brain. And then the last kind of component here is, in Parkinson's disease, there is an aggregate or a buildup of misfolded proteins in the substantia nigra, which is the area in our brain that we usually produce dopamine and is really affected by Parkinson's disease. And this protein is called alpha-synuclein protein. So we see protein aggregates or clumps of protein in Alzheimer's disease. We also see it in Parkinson's disease, different process, but similar concept, that when you have these proteins that are kind of misfolded, they're not a healthy shape, they get stuck together and they create these clumps. It's very toxic for that part of our brain. And that's part of what is creating a problem for that area of our brain, the substantia nigra, to make dopamine. And so studies are showing us that, where do these misfolded proteins come from? We're starting to understand that their proteins are a lot of times coming from our gut. And this whole process that we talked about of the breakdown of the integrity, the change in the bacteria and the different species in our gut are contributing to these misfolded proteins that then travel throughout our system and can end up in the substantia nigra in our brain. So our gut and our brain are really connected. And we even have nerves that go directly from our brain to our gut. They're not through the spinal cord, they go directly. So this connection is really important to understand. And when we do understand it, it makes sense why modifying your diet, really optimizing your diet, has such a big impact in your brain. So this is a picture of what we just talked about. And so we'll just pause here for a moment. This might be a little technical for some of us, and it might be perfect for others. So I'm going to just pause here for a moment, and then we'll move on. If it's a little too much, don't worry about it. Essentially, when we have a healthy gut, we talked about, we'll have beneficial bacteria. They're going to be making these compounds called short chain fatty acids, which are really healthy for the immune system. They decrease inflammation, and they actually make, in our gut, these bacteria are making, really supporting our brain cells. And when we have disruption of it, of our gut from diet, from alcohol consumption, from toxins and other disease products, were really dysregulating the gut. On this slide as well, you can see over on the side where you see the brain, the little red clump in the brain is showing, it's a pictorial form of what happens with the alpha-synuclein proteins that get all stuck together and they congregate in the substantia nigra. And they can also travel via this nerve. Some of you might have heard of it. It's called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve leaves directly from our brain and travels. It goes through a variety of parts of our body, but it directly travels to part of our gastrointestinal tract or our gut. And so any of the proteins that are being created, of these sticky proteins that are being created in our gut, can also travel via this nerve. So again, we have our gut and our brain very intimately connected, and the health of one really impacts the health of the other. I want to take a look at this study. It specifically is a trial with people with Parkinson's disease. It came out in 2020, so very recent. And they were looking at modifying diet and also doing a bowel cleanse for people with Parkinson's, and they also had healthy controls. The diet intervention was ovo-lacto-vegetarian, which means that we're eating a lot of plants, but you were still eating some dairy and some egg products. They also added the short chain fatty acid supplementation, which we talked about. It's anti-inflammatory and can help regulate the immune system and the microbiome. And then some patients additionally received a fecal enema as part of it. So they looked at short-term and long-term impact of what this did. So they saw in the microbiome, so all the things living in our gut, they had an increase in, won't pronounce all these words for you, it doesn't really matter, other than to say that these species of bacteria that increased are really healthy and modify inflammation. They decrease inflammation, and they saw a decrease in pathogenic or bacteria species that cause disease and worsen disease. And so they had literal measurements in fecal matter of the changes in the microbiome. They compared that also to patient reports of how do I feel? What are my symptom changes and symptom changes? The other thing that was really interesting out of this study is that they saw a levodopa equivalent dose of medication actually decreased after 1 year of eating the vegetarian diet and doing the fecal enema. So it hits, we're decreasing our symptoms and improving measurements of quality of life. Some individuals are able to decrease their medication and maintain that decrease a year later. And we're seeing physical measurements and changes in the microbiome. So this is just one trial, but it's very promising. And something I also really appreciate about this trial is that they did do a year follow-up and to see, are the impacts, these positive impacts, still there down the line? Because let's be really honest here. I don't want to see a trial that's like, oh great, we get improvements in 4 weeks or 6 weeks, but then we don't see that improvement stay, because Parkinson's is chronic and we really want to be making changes that are going to be healthfully impacting us down the line. So some of the aspects about that, by altering the short chain fatty acids and bacteria, they're digesting food a lot better. It's decreasing our inflammation in our brain, and we're decreasing the amount of harmful bacteria that can cause more inflammation and toxins in our system. So the key elements of a whole plant-based diet are that when we eat more plants, we are introducing more pre and probiotics, which leads to that healthy gut microbiome. So prebiotic is just the fuel that the bacteria need to eat to do their proper functioning. And the probiotics are items that actually have bacteria in them. So an example of prebiotic would be cabbage, as an example, is a food that bacteria can break down and eat. And then a probiotic, yes, they're supplemental forms, but fermented types of foods. So you could think about sauerkraut or kimchi will have active bacteria or active culture in them. When we eat a lot of whole plant-based foods, we have an abundance of antioxidants. And again, when we remember that chronic inflammation is a huge problem in Parkinson's, when we eat more antioxidants, it helps to regulate this inflammation. Plant foods are also really rich in fiber. In fact, you can essentially get basically no fiber from animal food. And fiber feeds this healthy bacteria. It also dramatically improves bowel movements. And I know constipation is a huge issue in Parkinson's disease, as I'm sure we all know or personally experienced. So eating enough fiber and plant whole food fiber, not supplemental, but whole food fiber is really important. We're also getting a variety of vitamins and minerals, which are always going to be more absorbable when they come from food. Supplements have their place, but even high quality supplements in trial after trial, they're still not absorbed as well as vitamins and minerals that come from food. So we really want to focus mostly on foods. And we're not adding additional ingredients that gum up and cause problems in our digestive tract that are really unnecessary. Here's a list of key antioxidants for the brain. All of these play a significant role in Parkinson's, and almost all of these are found in the highest concentration in plants. There are some that are definitely found in animal products. And again, we see that we can include some animal products still eat in a very healthy diet, but main focus will be eating mostly plant foods that have these antioxidants. And a quick highlight on glutathione. Glutathione is an antioxidant that our bodies make. It's the most powerful antioxidant that our bodies make. And so we can take it supplementally. There's some foods that can impact, different things impact glutathione levels. But more than anything, we really want to improve our own body's production of glutathione. We have lots of evidence that shows that in Parkinson's disease, glutathione levels, particularly in the brain, are really low. And glutathione protects our neurons. And so we really want to support glutathione levels in the brain and in our body. And so like I said, we can do that in a few different ways. In addition to modifying our microbiome, getting better nutrient absorption, decreasing inflammation, eating whole plants has also been shown to turn on longevity genes in our brain and in other parts of our body. A lot of these healthy antioxidants signal the brain to clean up damaged or dead cells, and that's really important in Parkinson's. So we see that the neurons that are making dopamine in our brain in Parkinson's disease are dying or have died. And that's part of why we can't produce as much dopamine anymore, or we get to the point where we really need to take medication to completely supplement for dopamine production. So by eating plant foods, we're actually telling our brain we need to clean up those dead cells. That's really important because when you have dead cells lying around and they're not cleaned up, they're just releasing byproducts of the death or toxic. I think I lost you all. Are we back?
Can you hear me, Emma?
Okay,
Can you hear
I
me?
can
Can everybody
see.
hear me?
Yep, now I can hear you.
And you can hear me. Okay.
Just so, can you hear me, Emma? Maybe.
Whoever that is, I can hear. This is Michelle Gutierrez. I
Yeah,
can,
this is
gentlemen.
Alejandro.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. And I can hear Emma and see her.
Okay, looks like we're back again.
Okay.
Hers was
Are we
cutting out
back?
a little bit. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Okay. All right. I'll keep going, and if I need to switch to a different device, we'll do that.
Okay.
Okay. Let's jump back in here. Okay. So we talked about benefits of eating. Here, when we say phytochemicals, I'm basically just talking about compounds that are made by plants. And we see in research, it shows that some of these phytochemicals are really rich in berries and herbs and spices and greens, things like that, actually can prevent the alpha-synuclein aggregation of clusters of proteins in the brain, and it can literally dissolve some of the preformed clusters, is what we're seeing in research. And that, of course, is preventing and helping us with the inflammation in our brain and improving function of our dopaminergic neurons, or the neurons that are creating dopamine. So that's really important. These are preclinical studies, so we have a lot more research to do in this area. And it's very promising that we are finding that some of these phytochemicals and these antioxidants are actually modifying the alpha-synuclein buildup. I've gotten this question in several other talks, so I just wanted to address it here about a ketogenic diet being beneficial for Parkinson's or the brain. And so I'll share what I know about it. Basically, that I haven't seen any significant clinical trials that demonstrate efficacy over time, like we have seen with whole foods plant-based diet. So that's a limitation. And I've seen studies, very short-term case-based studies, basically, if this person eats this and is just reporting on it, but I haven't seen any good trials that reach larger groups of people. And again, nothing that like this is helping us maintain decrease in medications, decrease in symptoms, decrease in progression over a year or more in time. And why? So here are some of the risks that have come out of different ketogenic trials in other conditions, is that a lot of times you have nutrient deficiencies pop up because you have to eat so many animal products and so many high fat products exclusively. We're seeing a lot of nutrient deficiencies. We see dehydration. Of course, when you're eating something like a fresh apple, as an example, it actually has a lot of water contained in it, and fat does not have a high water content. We see risk of kidney stones increase. And then for people who are being very strict, because you have to be very strict to actually reach ketosis. A lot of people say, oh, I'm sort of ketogenic, but you're not really reaching ketosis and the actual definition of this diet. And you can't eat a lot of fruits and veggies on that diet. There's also conflicting evidence showing that, is it that when you eat a ketogenic diet, you're eating a lot of fat? So by literal definition, you have to restrict protein in order to eat that much fat. And we know that restricting protein around, also some evidence, we're not sure if, is it the diet or is it protein restriction? Let's see. Lastly, eating high concentration of animal foods has potential for concentration of Okay, are we back again?
Yes.
Yes, I can
Yes.
try jumping onto a different internet here, and then we won't be able to see the rest of the slides, but I could definitely keep talking if we want to try from that.
If that works better for you.
Let's see here. I'd love for you all to see the slides, but We'll try one more time, and then if it's a no-go, we'll go from there. Okay, so can we see the slide starting practical applications of how to implement this diet? Can you all see?
90% rule.
Okay, all right. So here's just practical steps. So we understand now this is important, it has a big impact, and how do we actually implement it? So I would recommend sticking with a guideline of about 90% of the time. Do what works for you. If you have a long way to go, if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, I have a lot of changes I would need to make, start with 50% of the time. Find something that works for you and then slowly work up. I'd like to think of animal products and minimally processed foods more like side dishes or seasonings. So learning how to cook is definitely going to be let's see here. I'm seeing if I can do audio. Okay, can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I jumped onto a different thing, so we don't have the rest of the slides here, but I can provide the slides for you all later. I just want to make sure that we can hear everything as we go through the remainder.
Yeah, it actually sounds much better.
Sounds much better. Okay, yeah, let's just continue this way. My apologies on that end. So, all right, so the next step I would say after you really modify what percentage you're going for, like make a reasonable goal and stick with it. About if you can work up to about 90% of the time, that's going to have a really positive impact on your brain health and in Parkinson's, but try to stick with it as much as you can, knowing that if you go out and it's a birthday celebration, you're getting together with friends on a holiday, any of that, enjoy yourself. You definitely have to keep living, and there are going to be times when we eat not quote optimally, but make a goal for yourself and do your best. And so one of the best ways I know to actually make that happen is to learn how to cook. Because when you cook your own food, or the majority of your own food, you get to really choose what ingredients you're including, and you get to really maximize those phytonutrients that we were talking about. So you get to be really particular and add in the foods, the herbs and spices that have the richest source of antioxidants, and you can create meals that are really potent and really are medicine. So if learning to cook is a big challenge, or learning to cook in a different way, in this different way that maybe you haven't before is a big challenge, I would definitely recommend taking a class, go with a partner or a friend, learn to cook intergenerationally. So maybe a grandchild is interested in cooking, and it could be a fun opportunity for both of you to learn. And I would encourage it to be a fun learning process. So maybe pick a new recipe or ingredient each week, and then you can slowly over time build your repertoire of what you know how to do. But again, slow and steady wins the race here when it comes to dietary changes. So just kind of one step at a time. When we're talking about cooking in Parkinson's, we definitely want to think safety first. So I commonly recommend microplane gloves. And I have a picture for you all in the slide deck if you're not sure what that is. But it's basically a very thin type of glove you can wear in the kitchen when you're cooking. It helps to protect your hands when you may be dealing with tremors or dyskinesia, because I know that can be kind of an issue for some people, or even for loved ones worried about you, cooking in the kitchen. And with that being said, you definitely want to use sharp knives because that actually improves cutting and you're not slipping off things as well. You can also consider wearing shoes in the kitchen to protect your feet from hot water or anything falling. I don't recommend using metal utensils on nonstick pans because that can cause some of that chemical to come up off of the pan, and we don't want to be eating that. And also just think of cooking as a time for minimizing distraction. So really focusing on what you're doing. And it even can be considered a mindfulness activity, but just be as focused as you can in the kitchen. So for a few grocery store tips, when you're thinking about going to the grocery store, I would think about kind of mapping out where you want to visit in the grocery store, spending most of your time in the perimeter or the outside, because that's where most of your produce is going to be, refrigerated goods, bulk items, that kind of thing, and really thinking about where you're visiting, because as humans, we are emotional shoppers. So if you show up to the grocery store and you're hungry, or you're going by an aisle that you've gone by for the last 40 years and you always get these crackers or these cookies or this bread or whatever it happens to be, we're creatures of habit and emotion based, and that's okay. But we know that if you go through certain aisles or you're following your same previous habits, it can be much harder to shift what you're buying. I'd also recommend not doing frozen meals. You can definitely buy frozen fruits and veggies, and that can be helpful, especially if you're not eating through food a lot, like maybe it's just you or one other person. But frozen meals have a lot of added sodium or added salt, sugars, and a lot of other things in them to kind of keep them good for a while. So, and you can also have nutrients degrade over time when they're frozen. So as much as you can, avoid frozen meals. And then when you're in the grocery store too, I'd recommend actually reading ingredient lists, and that will help you understand better what is in the food that you're actually eating. So try to pick foods that have ingredient lists with 6 or fewer items is a good guideline to look at. If you're looking at a list and you can't pronounce any of the words, like what is disodium guanylate? I don't even know what that is. Then that's something that is definitely in the processed or ultra processed category, and we don't really want you to be eating that. And if there are things that are just not food, like yellow 6 is a dye, as an example, again, that's kind of that little warning bell to be like, oh, okay, that probably doesn't fall under the whole food guideline. So to increase antioxidants in your diet, I think of antioxidants and these phytochemicals we talked about. They show up as color in food a lot. So eating a variety of colorful foods, vegetables, fruits, seaweeds, all of that is really important. Herbs and spices are going to be the most potent source of antioxidants you can find in food. So including herbs and spices into your dishes, into salad dressings or marinades. You can drink antioxidants in the form of herbal tea, green tea, or coffee. All of that is going to be really increasing those antioxidants that will help protect your brain. I also recommend eating fermented foods. Fermented foods, again, are going to contain those healthy bacteria that we want to be putting into our system. And then finally, toxin exposure, where this is not the focus of this talk, toxins from pesticides and all those other things, but do your best to decrease toxin exposure. And one toxin that I think a lot of people kind of can miss out a little bit sometimes is that alcohol. That ethanol or the alcohol component can be toxic and can kind of break down the integrity of that gut tissue, and it actually decreases glutathione production. So if we remember, glutathione is the important antioxidant in our brain that is highly potent, and we see low levels in Parkinson's disease. So drinking a lot of alcohol and a lot of exposure to that ethanol decreases the glutathione level. So I recommend completely avoiding or really reducing that exposure. When it comes to animal products, I highly recommend choosing quality if you're going to be including them. And when I mean quality, I mean choosing animal products from animals that have been raised in as close to their quote original environment as possible. So there's a study, which I know you all can't see because we're on audio only right now. However, there is a study that was looking at the quality of vitamin E and fatty acids in eggs that were pasture raised versus raised in a more conventional cage system. So pasture raised allows them to forage on grasses and seeds and a lot of other things. And after 6 weeks of allowing after 6 weeks of allowing the hens to forage naturally in the pasture, they saw that in each egg, they had 2.5 times more omega-3 fatty acids, which is the healthy type, and had over twice the amount of vitamin E per egg. So these are really healthy antioxidants that are now in the eggs. And we see similar studies coming out on pasture-raised, grass-fed products, wild-caught fish, things like that. So if you're going to be including animal products, the quality really matters. And you can actually increase, you can have healthy levels of fat and antioxidants and all that good stuff from these animal products. And it's much better for the environment as well. So remember to do, to include that, just that discernment of when you're particularly including animal products. So I think the last point in terms of just practical tip is remembering that food is not just fuel for the body. As humans, we have so many memories and emotions carried with food and mealtime. You might think fondly or not fondly back on your childhood about cooking or baking with someone. What kind of snacking habits have you built up over the time? What kind of family and cultural traditions do you have? Some of us have a thing for a crunch or an iced beverage or something salty or something sweet. And it's really connected with our mood and our emotions. And so anytime you're making a significant change to your diet and you're wanting to actually make that change, a lot of the objections or questions I get, it's like, well, but what do I do when it's 3 p.m. and I just want my Coke and my crackers? Like that's what I have. That's what I've done for the last 40 years. And I want that bubbly and I want that crunch. So it's important to be really honest with yourself and to understand what are your associations and what makes you really happy, and how can you still give yourself those fond memories and those positive emotions and associations while also making some of these changes to really improve your health. So because of that, asking anyone to change their diet is probably the hardest thing I ask and what I do day in and day out. It's a big undertaking. And so be very kind to yourself. I have some resources. So I have some cookbooks. I have some websites you can read more about how to get started with a whole food plant-based diet. There are meal delivery services that can take off a little bit of that stress if cooking is a big undertaking for you or you need additional support. And I'm also starting a class in August of 2022, so just in a couple months here, that's specifically on nutrition and cooking for Parkinson's disease. And it gives you meal prep guidelines and goes into a lot more detail about how can I really do this? What should I be eating on a daily basis? What are these foods and herbs and spices that will optimize the phytonutrients, all of that, because again, getting the support to actually implement all of these changes is really important. So I think let's wrap it up here and open up to questions. If there are any.
This is Michelle. I have a question. You talked about glutathione. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes,
That
you
it's-
are.
It's in your body. How do you supplement that, or how do you make it better or get more? Is there a certain food or
Yeah,
tea
so
or something?
absolutely. So you can take it in a supplemental form. I always recommend, if you're doing a supplemental form, pick liposomal glutathione. It's more absorbable. And I recommend liquid liposomal glutathione.
Okay.
So in that sense. Now, innately, if we're trying to increase our own body production of glutathione, there's a compound in turmeric called curcumin you might have heard of. So curcumin increases glutathione production. There's a compound from milk thistle called silymarin, SILYMARIN, and that increases glutathione. We have sulfur compounds found in cruciferous vegetables. So for those of you who may or may not know, broccoli, Brussels
Cauliflower.
sprouts, cauliflower, bok choy. There's actually quite a lot of vegetables that fall into the cruciferous veggies. So like my recommendation is always definitely try to increase your intake. So you're eating at least 2 cups a day of cruciferous vegetables for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons is that this sulfur compound, which is healthy, it's a natural occurring healthy compound in these vegetables, does increase glutathione production. It's one of the building blocks basically. And then you need exercise really increases glutathione production, adequate sleep and the circadian rhythm. So you're actually getting quality sleep, which of course, all these topics we could have a whole other talk about any
Right.
given. And then alcohol suppresses glutathione production. Alcohol is also interesting. I think when we talk about alcohol, we might think just strictly like, oh, alcoholic drinks. Remember that the microbes in your gut, your bacteria and all that, can actually make byproducts, including ethanol or the structure of alcohol byproducts from bad digestion, basically. So again, when we circle back to the idea of like, we really need to take care of our microbiome and the bacteria that we can get small amounts of byproduct of like almost like alcohol byproducts. There are a lot of different chemical structures, but that can occur naturally if we're not having good digestion and all of that happening. And that can, again, just add to the toxin load. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you catch that? Somebody wrote a question in the chat and it was the same thing. How do we increase our glutathione? Besides making us fat, is ice cream bad for us?
That's a funny question. So, all right. So ice cream is not good for us. I'll just be really honest. And the reason is, again, it's ultra processed. Like even if you're doing a plant-based milk that makes ice cream, it usually contains high levels of sugar and a lot of other additives. The ingredient list is pretty long usually. And eating iced things slows down our digestive process in general. And in Parkinson's disease, the muscles are affected throughout our body. So all the muscles that line our digestive tract slow down also, in addition to like when we think about our arm muscles or our leg muscles and initiating walking. So digestion is slowed down. And when you put iced things into your digestion, it's harder to actually, because your body has to warm it all up and then digest it. And so it just takes a lot more blood flow and energy that your digestive system's already struggling a bit. And so it just makes it a little bit harder. So a couple ideas for those of us who might have been like, well, I've been eating ice cream for 50 years every night. Like, how do I make this change as an example? So one example can be, you could do this if you're not ready to completely move to plant-based, you could do it with like animal, like again, grass-fed cream, and you can whip up the cream from scratch. Don't add any sweetener, but you've whipped up cream. And now you have like freshly made whipped cream and you eat that with a cup of berries, like strawberries and blueberries. And so you're getting something very creamy, but you're also pairing it with antioxidant rich fruit, which is really tasty and naturally sweetening the cream. You can do it with coconut, like get a can of coconut milk and you can whip that up, or You can have it with yogurt and fruit. Like there's lots, you can even put a bunch of yogurt, again, dairy or not, depending on how you're able to move, which non-sweetened, blend it up with a bunch of fruit, put it in a container, freeze it, and then you're getting your frozen, there's lots of different steps we can take. But ultimately my goal is for you to be not eating as much processed and all these additives, and then try to get away from added sugars as much as possible. And think about, how can I really optimize antioxidants in my body? How can I include really good things for my body when I'm eating? Something like that. I'm sorry for those of you who that just crushed your ice cream dreams. But are there any other questions?
We live in a senior residency place and our meals are cooked for us.
Okay.
So from your talk, I'm realizing that we just need to be a little more judicious in what we're eating off the plate because they're not cooking that food. I happen to like cottage cheese and I try and have it for breakfast a couple of times a week. Is that a dairy that's no good?
So so let's do the cottage cheese first. So the cottage cheese would be like much better than something that has extra things added into it, like sweeteners and, all of that. Cottage cheese, if you could find a cottage cheese, I don't know which one you're eating, but a lot of times we can find cottage cheese that's coming from like organic or grass-fed animals, and they even have culture, like probiotics in them. So that would be much more healthy if you can find that, because when we have cultures or healthy bacteria in dairy, we find that it's not as significant of an impact as dairy that doesn't have it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that would be my goal around it. I think that if that's the main source of dairy or animal products that you're eating, like you're not eating a lot more, that seems like it would be on the smaller scale to have that a few times a week. But if it's like, oh, I eat cottage cheese with eggs, and then lunch I'm having a turkey sandwich, and then dinner I'm having a steak, we start adding up to a lot of animal products, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Within moderation. In terms of, it sounds like you have a lot of restrictions on what you can't really decide. You receive your meal and you have to kind of pick. There could be a few strategies to think about too, of maybe some things that you could have in your own space that you can add to meals as extra antioxidants, or even some herbs and spices that are really rich in antioxidants that you could add into your meal. Or things like, there's a type of berry that I love telling people about. It's called a barberry or a lingonberry. This berry is from northern regions, and it's highly potent form of antioxidants. You can get them dried, and the dose would be 1 tablespoon of these dried berries a day. And so that's something that you could add a tablespoon of the dried barberries to your cottage cheese, and then you're just boosting more antioxidants. But it's something that's dried, there's no additives, and you can have it in your own space and kind of augment. So that's another strategy to use when you don't have as much control over what you're eating.
Good. Thank you. I gave up cooking, so it makes it hard.
It does. It really does. Yeah, I hear that.
So basically you're saying keep antioxidants in as much as you can in your diet.
Absolutely. It's like this diet is, yes, it's about reducing or removing certain things, but it's also really about optimizing. Like, I think of every day, every opportunity of eating food as an opportunity to modify Parkinson's through what you're eating. And so I think that's also another way to really think about it in a positive lens of what can I add, what can I optimize, more so than just a restriction and a taking away.
Where could I find lingonberry?
I think usually the best, there are some stores that can carry them. So some, like I've seen them at Whole Foods, I've seen them at Middle Eastern markets, and I've seen them online. So for a lot of people, online is the best bet to buy the dried berries from. But it kind of depends what you have access to.
Thank you. You've been a world of information.
Yeah.
Okay, you're welcome.
My brain scrambled.
I know it's a lot of information, and I'd want to get you all the resources. And also, if you're interested in kind of going week by week and getting a little bit more support, like I said, I do have a class coming in August, which would help break it down a little bit more, and you get this information this week, and we're all supporting each other as we're working on that, and then we'll keep going week by week. So
Nice.
I get it. Absolutely. Is there anything else here? I know we're close to our time.
This is Jim. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
You mentioned, of course, getting rid of sugars and the like. Are any of the sugar substitutes okay or not?
Yeah, so I would say that there are some that can be really helpful, especially making a transition away. So if any of you've heard of monk fruit extract, so that's MONK, monk fruit. You can get it in liquid and powder form. Erythritol can be helpful. There's something called yacum, which is like a root, and that can ultimately, but it's been processed down. So that is also another sweetener. There are some people who like stevia and xylitol. I think the taste is funky. I think it ruins it. I'd rather it not be sweet, but it kind of is up to you. So you can potentially use that. The biggest thing I would say though, is try to find that minimal amount where you're just getting enough sweetener, but you're not sweetness from that different sweetener, but you're not overdoing it, because it can confuse some of the bacteria that lives in our gut. We're seeing some certain studies come out that a lot of these kind of fake sweeteners can still cause a confused chemical reaction with microbes, versus if you're getting it from fruit. I really love getting sweetness from fruit and exploring with different types of fruit. So for example, pineapple is actually really sweet and it has a low glycemic index. So pineapple is a great thing to add to smoothies or other dishes that will really change the sweetness profile, and to be patient with yourself just to kind of start. But yeah, I would say those are probably the ones that I would recommend playing around with first. And then
What about agave?
so agave is going to be slightly better than like white table sugar, but it's still a pretty solid source of sugar and fructose. Kind of like honey. Like I'm not against, like I'd rather you add those in, you know how much you're adding. You're not, it's not some a processed food where you really don't know how much you're eating. So you're adding it in, but it's not packaged with any fiber or water to slow down absorption. So it's still going to be a pretty concentrated amount of sugar, like maple syrup and honey and agave. All of those are pretty concentrated. So again, just know that when you pair any form of sugar, you want to pair it with fiber. Think about that, because the fiber slows down absorption of sugar. So you're not going to get that strong blood sugar spike. So if you're eating, that's why when I was talking about that kind of like faux ice cream example of whipping your cream and then putting it with fruit, the fruit contains fiber. In fact, berries like raspberries, like 1 cup of raspberry has 8 grams of fiber. That's awesome. That's a really high amount of fiber. So putting it together slows down the absorption of sugar more so than if you just had your cream and you just put honey on it, as an example. I don't know who would eat that. Maybe some people eat that. I'm not sure, but anyway. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And was it Jim or?
Yeah, it answered mine. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. I think we might be wrapping up here. Am I right in terms of time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for
Great.
coming and doing that. That was so
Definitely.
much information. That was awesome.
Absolutely. Well, and I would be really happy to send the slides and also with my contact information. So if there are any other questions that come up or people are interested in the class or just want to review the slides, I'd be really happy to send that over. And again, please don't hesitate to follow up with any questions or if you're interested in just doing some further work on this and getting the further support. Because I know it's a huge information dump and I want you all to be successful in integrating even some of these tips. So thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to chat with you all. My apologies again for any of the internet connection breakdown, but
Lord,
thank
no
you.
worries. That was awesome. Thank you so much. And you got you said you got info out there for people to contact you.
I do. Well, and I can send it again to, I think Dr. Meredith already has some information, but I'll just
Yeah.
make sure that she gets it to send it out to you all. People can follow up. Does that work?
That is
Excellent, yeah.
perfect. Yeah, Meredith mentions this class is going to be on the website in a few weeks. It takes a little bit to get it, whatever, produced or however they word that, but this will be one thing that'll be on the website if you guys need to go back and look at it again. And
Oh, perfect.
yeah, like she said, if you need, Meredith can send you guys her info or you guys can reach out. We'll figure it out though.
Right.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.